Oh, I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. And I travelled the world with him, and I did really enjoy working with him. But, you know, now I really don't care if I ever see him again, because the way he's behaved towards the king and our queen and his brother and his sister-in-law is appalling.
Forget the polished fairy tale you were spoon-fed on TV. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's royal wedding? Oh, please, that wasn't a love story. It was a Hollywood-style circus, staged down to the last detail for flashing cameras and glossy magazine spreads. Those royal carriages, the soaring music, the celebrity guests looking like they'd just stepped off a runway. None of it was real. It was pure performance, a show put on for the world, not a celebration of love. And let me tell you, while the world was swooning, those who were actually there saw something very, very different.
She delivered it like an actress delivered it. An opera responded going, wow.
Behind the curtain, it was chaos, absolute chaos. Royal photographer Arthur Edwards finally confirmed what people had whispered for years. The event was a mess. Guests were packed under a merciless sun, roasting in their suffocating coats and gowns, trying not to faint from the heat. Can you imagine? Senior royals, people who had given their entire lives to the crown, were shoved to the back like unwanted extras. Meanwhile, Meghan's Hollywood pals, some of them literal nobodies, strutted into front row seats, turning Windsor into their personal red carpet. Respect, tradition, forgotten.
Life, you know, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And, you know, I thought to myself, this all show.
And the press? Oh, the very press that made the wedding the global event it was. Harry punished them like enemies. He refused to look at cameras, deliberately ducked angles, leaving photographers scrambling like paparazzi trying to catch a runaway celebrity. Arthur Edwards himself admitted he couldn't get a single decent photo. Imagine that, a royal wedding with no usable royal photographs. Can you believe it?
He was angry, and I felt we were punished for that. In fact, I never got one picture in the paper published.
And Meghan didn't walk down that aisle like a bride entering a family. No, she walked in like a brand making its debut. Forget love. Forget the sacred joining of two dynasties. This was a launch party, plain and simple. On TV, sure, it looked magical. Flags waving, choirs singing, cameras capturing glowing smiles. But those inside? They weren't swept away by romance. They were suffocating in the heat, gasping for air, clinging to fans as sweat ruined their designer dresses and makeup. It wasn't elegance. It was survival. Arthur Edwards himself called it the worst royal event he had ever worked on. And that's coming from a man who witnessed Charles and Diana's whirlwind romance and William and Kate's graceful pageantry.
I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding
Arthur had seen it all, the highs, the lows, the heart-stopping royal moments, but nothing compared to this train wreck. And no, it wasn't just the heat. Royals have endured rain, storms, and even snow on important days. This was different. This time, the comfort of the guests didn't matter at all. The only thing that mattered was how it looked on TV. The cameras captured glossy smiles, but off-screen, exhaustion, frustration, misery. This so-called day of joy was nothing more than an endurance test.
He was determined to keep the newspapers away from it as much as possible. Everything was done on long lenses. I mean, I tell you, had an 800mm lens photographing the guests.
Yes, to TV viewers it looked like a fairy tale. But to those trapped inside Windsor Castle, it was unbearable. And if the heat wasn't enough, the seating plan was the ultimate slap in the face. Lifelong royals, military heroes, family members who had given their blood, sweat, and years of service, shoved aside like nobodies. While Hollywood stars, some of whom barely even knew Harry or Meghan, strutted to the front rows for their close-ups. It wasn't about family, it wasn't about honor, it was about who looked best for the cameras.
The photographers they engaged for the job was 5 feet away, you know, it was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way. So for me, it was a...
Arthur Edwards himself, the man who has spent decades faithfully photographing the monarchy, joked that he practically needed a GPS to find his seat. Can you imagine? His view was blocked, his work sabotaged. After a lifetime of loyalty to the crown, he was treated like background scenery while strangers basked in the spotlight. Guests whispered in disbelief, calling the entire thing a red carpet stunt. This wasn't Windsor Castle anymore. It had transformed into a Hollywood awards show in royal disguise. The message was clear. Tradition meant nothing. Star power meant everything. And if guests thought the reception would save the day, oh boy, were they wrong.
And I think done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. You know, I mean, they were lovely occasions. But that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. I promise you that day.
A royal wedding reception is supposed to be legendary. Overflowing banquet tables, champagne towers, dishes that make history. But Meghan and Harry, they served what can only be described as a glorified cocktail party. Forget the grandeur of royal feasts. Guests were handed tiny finger foods and microscopic canapes. Imagine wearing a gown worth thousands only to nibble on a crumb of avocado toast or a macaron the size of a coin. People whispered in shock. This is the wedding of the decade? Some laughed it off, others were outright furious. Arthur himself called the food pathetic. And honestly, it wasn't just about the food, it was symbolic. A royal wedding should scream tradition and abundance. But this one, it screamed Instagram chic, all presentation, no substance.
I felt so. I felt, it wasn't just me, it was the whole of the British press. You know, they were in many ways badly treated. I think it was, Harry was angry with us really because some of the things that have been said about Meghan, and quite rightly, some of the things that were said about Meghan during the engagement were...
And if the suffocating heat, humiliating seating, and pathetic food weren't already bad enough, Harry himself decided to make things worse. Instead of embracing the press, a duty every royal before him understood as part of the job, he turned hostile. Harry glared at cameras, dodged angles, deliberately blocking photographers from doing their work. Arthur Edwards and the other professionals on duty, they were in hell. This wasn't the future king's elegant smile or William's dignified wave. This was Harry acting like a sulking celebrity on a red carpet, throwing a tantrum every single moment that should have been captured for history. He sabotaged it. For the first time ever, a royal wedding produced no respectable photographs. That's not incompetence, that's deliberate.
To say though, you know, that first year of Meghan, working with her on the road, you know, we went all over the country. She was incredible. I mean, I thought she was a great asset.
Arthur later revealed it wasn't an accident. Harry did it on purpose. It was his way of punishing the British press. The same press he blamed for Meghan's harsh headlines. Instead of rising above, instead of carrying himself with grace, Harry weaponized the wedding itself. Can you imagine? A day that was supposed to symbolize joy and unity was twisted into a battlefield for Harry's grudges. This wasn't a prince stepping into his duty. This was a man consumed by bitterness, more focused on settling scores than honoring centuries of tradition. And when it came to tradition, Meghan and Harry didn't just bend the rules, they shattered them. From the sermon that felt more like a Hollywood monologue than a sacred message, to the Americanized performances shoved into the ceremony, everything screamed, "Look at us!" instead of "Honor the crown." This wasn't the timeless continuity of royal unions. This was a brand launch rebrand, carefully curated for headlines. Arthur noticed immediately, nothing about the day reflected the monarchy's steadiness. It wasn't history, it wasn't tradition. It was a spectacle, stripped of meaning and stuffed with gimmicks. Rituals that once stood for loyalty and unity were dismissed as outdated, replaced with stunts designed for viral clips. To many of the guests, it was painful. This wasn't Charles and Diana uniting destiny with romance. This wasn't William and Kate blending grace with modernity. This was Harry and Meghan drawing a line in the sand, loudly declaring, "We're different. We don't need the family, and we don't want their rules." And make no mistake, that wedding wasn't a union. It was a declaration of independence, a mockery of the very institution footing the bill. They weren't innovating, they were burning bridges. When the confetti settled, the so-called fairy tale turned to silence. Meghan and Harry didn't just step back from the family. They slammed the door and welded it shut. Invitations to royal estates? Ignored. Offers for family gatherings? Declined. Instead, Harry insisted on hotels, private security, and total control. The result? Grandparents who longed to see Archie and Lilibet were cut off, watching their grandchildren grow up through tabloids and staged magazine covers. Arthur Edwards called it heartbreaking. An entire generation of royal cousins, bonds that should have been forged in childhood, simply erased. The family legacy fractured, and the bitter twist, Harry and Meghan never stopped preaching about family and compassion in interviews. But behind closed doors, they denied those very connections to their own children. Privacy wasn't about protection. It became a shield, a tool to lock the royals out while cashing in by selling their story to the highest bidder. So let's be clear, that wedding didn't unite families. It fractured them even more. Every refusal to show up, every cold shoulder, every carefully orchestrated snub, it chipped away at any hope of reconciliation. What began as a glamorous royal wedding ended as the opening act of estrangement. For the royals, it felt like betrayal wrapped in independence. For the children, it was simply loss. And if the wedding was the performance, then the Oprah interview? That was the encore, and twice as ruthless. Meghan and Harry sat in front of cameras not to heal, not to explain, but to detonate. They hurled accusations of racism and cruelty at the royal family, painting themselves as victims in a narrative no one else was allowed to challenge. Arthur Edwards didn't mince words. He called it exactly what it was. Not a conversation, not truth-telling, but a staged attack. And the timing? Oh, it was perfect. And by perfect, I mean manipulative. Just when sympathy was fading, just when their star power risked losing its shine, they dropped a bomb big enough to dominate headlines for weeks. The Oprah special wasn't about reconciliation. It was about relevance, profit, and publicity. Millions tuned in expecting raw honesty. Instead, they watched a carefully rehearsed script designed to humiliate the monarchy while elevating Team Sussex as martyrs. The aftermath was brutal. Families torn further apart, trust obliterated, and centuries of royal dignity dragged into Oprah's backyard. So, while millions across the world clapped and cheered for the glossy spectacle, those inside Windsor saw the truth. A boiling, uncomfortable, humiliating disaster masquerading as history. The guests left whispering, the royals left wounded, the monarchy left shaken, and Meghan and Harry, they left with exactly what they wanted. Attention, headlines, a brand that could outshine the very institution they abandoned. Arthur Edwards, at 85, didn't just confirm the rumors, he exposed the entire illusion. He revealed that the wedding the world remembers as a fairy tale was in reality a scandal, a launchpad for chaos that never truly ended. Because let's face it, Meghan and Harry didn't just marry each other that day, they married themselves to drama, to scandal, to the spotlight. And the monarchy? It's still picking up the pieces. So, the next time someone calls it the wedding of the century, remember this. It wasn't a royal celebration. It was a PR stunt in a tiara, a circus wrapped in lace, a brand launch disguised as vows, and a scandal that confirmed everything we suspected all along. And that, as Arthur Edwards finally admitted, is the real story of Meghan and Harry's wedding. Not love, not unity, but the beginning of a long, messy saga that still dominates the world's gossip today.